Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first webinar in the Clubhouse of Development webinar series. The Cogeo team is very excited to be able to launch this project with Georgia Soccer and offer our fundraising advice to its members. Before I tell you a bit about Cogeo and our speaker, I want to say that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to ask them in the GoToWebinar tool, and we'll make sure to review those before we sign off. Cogeo specializes in youth sports and sports-related 501c3 fundraising and organizational sustainability. Our work spans multiple sports within the nonprofit industry and geographical regions within the U.S. The U.S. management team has, the Cogeo management team has 50 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $650 million for more than 150 nonprofit organizations. And one key reason that we're very passionate about working with sports organizations and soccer clubs such as yourselves is that our executive management were involved at elite sporting levels, both as soccer players and coaches. And that includes Rob Cusell, who will be your speaker today. As an avid soccer player and coach, Rob was a college All-American during his playing days at Williams College and coached the Napa United U16 girls team to a win at the 2012 NorCal State Premier Cup. Rob is a managing director of consulting services at Cogeo and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. This includes his time as director of development with Stanford University, where he raised funds for the initial build-out of the Stanford Soccer Stadium. He directed the founding development efforts for the YSC Academy, raised $1.3 million for Philadelphia Union, led a major gifts initiative for the San Francisco Elite Academy, and directed the Westmont United Soccer Association in a 3-year, $3.2 million capital campaign to build out 2 lit fields and its headquarters. And with that, I will pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Mel, and hello, everyone. So on slide number 3, what you've got is an outline of the 8 sessions that we have planned for Georgia Soccer. Today's the first section, which is effectively communicating with membership. Then we'll explore the board's role. We'll look at event fundraising for clubs, what's going on there, turning community and club members into donors, attracting corporate sponsorships, foundation grant funding, monetizing high net worth donor prospect, and then specifically fundraising for facilities and facility upgrades. And finally, the importance of stewardship in terms of best business practices. Now we're going to touch on all this today, and you'll see why. The next slide, number 4, is a really good representative. It's especially effective with boards of directors who will tell the executive director, hey, let's fundraise without any tactical sense whatsoever. You know, let's do an event or let's, whatever that might be, which is not the way to go. You want to build it from the bottom up. And this is a house of development that has each tactical area represented by a room within the house. And again, you should look at this from the bottom up. Today, we're going to look at the blue area, which is communication and outreach. How best to do that and what tools to leverage to ensure you've got best business practices. And to give you a little more context to Mel's point, currently we're working with clubs around the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast, up and down. That includes YSC Academy, which is Philadelphia Union, on and off there. Westmont United, she mentioned. We're about to go to work with Frederick, Maryland. They just acquired 140 acres. They want to build a complex, pretty big project there. As well as Clarksville, Tennessee, Orlando City, from where Laura Halfpenny, your CEO, Executive Director of the Georgia Soccer, comes from, and that's how I met Laura, as well as many clubs on the West Coast. Just to give you context, and these are just current clients. We've worked with a lot of other clubs as well. Slide number 5. So what are we going to try and accomplish today in the next 55 minutes or so? We're going to define what development fundraising campaign is. We're going to talk about the relevancy of it in terms of understanding the role of communication within various parts of a development campaign, as well as who's responsible for what types of communication within the fundraising framework. And then Very importantly, data management. How clean and organized data systems are vital for executing effective communication over time. And all of you know this because you've got effective member data management products. Here we're going to talk more about customer relationship management, CRM. And good news here, there is a free product out there where we put all of our clients on, which is Salesforce.com nonprofit product. And it's a fantastic CRM system. And that's what we do with all the clubs that we work with. But we find that most just aren't there yet. So what is development? It's a euphemism for managing relationships, really, developing relationships, fundraising. Because the money trails after the relationship. So definition, the process of creating and enhancing relationships with current and potential donors, prospects, to promote the likelihood of securing current and future funding. A development campaign, what is that? Well, it's an ongoing coordinated performance of that fundraising activity to attract and engage current and prospective donors to financially support the club's identified areas of programmatic and, if applicable, capital project needs, programs, and then fields and facilities. And why is fundraising important? Because again, what we found in our conversations with 500 clubs over the last 8 years is, number one, only 2 of the clubs had directors of development, and most of them just hadn't begun this process, even though they were 501c3. So donation-based revenue is the next untapped funding stream frontier, really, for 501c3 clubs. And for-profit clubs can get in the game by putting together a foundation. We're currently doing that with San Francisco United in the Bay Area, and that's going very well. The next page, just some quick stats, one of which I just mentioned. Our own data, we've interacted with over 500 clubs since 2012. The Stanford project, University project, was in 1997. And that's when things really began to percolate. University of Indiana had a nice stadium then. Hartwick had a really good stadium, as did UConn. But for the most part, it really wasn't there yet. And then we saw Creighton put together a really nice facility, and then everybody else since then has good facilities. And the 4 areas that we saw most relevant were economic access, financial aid, to make sure that there was the opportunity for those who could play at the club level, at the elite level, to have access to the pay-to-play model through financial aid offerings. Facilities. So Orlando City, our focus down there is to build an indoor facility and then renovate all of Seminole Complex. We're going to do that over several years. Coaching education, another big one, as well as in-kind giving of equipment and technology. And as I mentioned, of the 500 clubs with which we spoke, only 2, one in Texas, and the other one, I forget exactly where it was, had directors of development on staff. So we're making the market. If you're not doing this at this juncture, don't feel bad, because it's still very, very young in terms of adoption of these practices in the 501c3 sector, clubs and leagues and governing bodies. So what we know is this. This was a study that was done in 2017 by the business school at Stanford, and it was a survey on leadership and management in the entire sector. And the greatest struggle areas for 501c3 nonprofits are board governance, how really to manage a board and the effectiveness of a board of directors, and then funding, 56% and 52%, so more than half. So we know there's an issue there, and that's why we're in business. The next slide. So people ask us, so what is the role of the board of directors in a 501c3? And it's actually really simple. Everybody in the agency reports to the executive director, the CEO, the president. The only person who reports to the board of directors and who should interact with the board of directors is the CEO. She should be that person who is engaging with the board. And so one of the responsibilities of the board is to oversee the executive director, the director of coaching, if that is the principal player in the club, and the financial well-being, the fiduciary responsibility of the club, and that's it. So it's hiring, managing, and firing the executive director, the number one employee, whoever the managing director is, or director of coaching, right? And then making sure that the club is sustainable. And we know with COVID that there have been board meetings that have really focused on, how are we going to operate with fewer membership fees? So right now, the role of the board is even more accentuated than it's ever been, because fiduciary responsibility means a balanced budget, if not a profit. And so the other area that should be involved in is this area that we're talking about, which is making sure the revenue streams are diverse, particularly in this era, because we know that registrations are down, and therefore they should be engaged in tactically in fundraising. And that's it. They should not be involved in programmatic decisions. Obviously, club-wide decisions that impact facilities, of course, because that has to do with financials. But in terms of hiring and firing coaches, no. Having input on it, no. That is the role of the number one, the top employee in the agency, who then reports to the board of directors and explains to them what's going on. And we don't see this as often as we'd like to see it. We see a lot of interference from certain board members who aren't really being coached well by the chairman of the board. And then the other question we get asked is, what is the relationship between the executive director, the top employee, and the board, and the chair of the board in particular? And our answer is it has to be a really trusting relationship, almost as equals. And the best boards we see out there are ones that were created very thoughtfully, tactically, in conjunction between the executive director and the current or new chair of the board. We've built board of directors for foundations and clubs, and there's certain characteristics you look for, and I'll talk about that when we talk about the role of the board in the next webinar. So how do you engage the board of directors? The first thing, if they really buy into this concept, they themselves need to make an annual contribution at whatever level they're comfortable. Two reasons. One, it demonstrates to the broader community membership that, hey, the board is giving. We've got 100% board giving. And then the second thing is, we know that when we approach foundations for consideration of an investment or a gift, the first questions they'll ask, one of the first questions, do you have 100% board participation? And unless you can demonstrate that, 99% of the time, you will not be allowed to even apply. So that's really important. And then the second is really their role. We're not going to talk about hiring and firing and managing an executive director today. They do that. But in terms of development and fundraising, there's several things that they can do. They can engage. They can host or attend a cultivation event, which is really a small event where you tell the story. Generally at somebody's home. They can review wealth screening lists. I'll touch on that in a little bit. They can join the executive director or the director of coaching in high-level meetings with small businesses or wealthy parents, or once the campaign is launched. And then they can also augment on donor stewardship where relevant or asked to by the club in this case. And that is the fact, once the gift comes in, we want to have many thank yous. And this is where board members can actually augment on the formal thank you that goes out. So once you're ready to launch your campaign and you've decided which areas you're going to focus on in terms of funding, the thing that you should do immediately is create a case statement. Now, we've done this for a lot of clubs. If you go to cogeo.us/case, the link is up there now, you'll be able to see many clubs and how we're making the case. Now, the pictures will be different, the text will be different, the club name will be different, but you'll see the similarities on how the case is made and how it's all presented very logically and really nicely, because essentially this is a document which varies in length, which will actually do the selling for you. It's very effective. So it's the tool that puts it all together. It gives an overview, a history of the club, a description of current programs, the vision for the future, and all of this is supported by stakeholder quotes, community leader quotes, quote from the executive director, the chairman of the board. The vision for the future, as I mentioned, the timeline of what it is we're going to accomplish, all of the financial needs to accomplish that timeline and those projects, and what the costs, associated costs, will be. You'll have a demonstration of strong leadership through partners and individuals and community leaders, as well as the board of directors and perhaps the board of advisors, and maybe even a parent leadership group. And then, as I mentioned, testimonials and quotes and pictures really supplement everything in the case. So I would urge you just to go and check a few of these out on your free time, and you'll see again the power of each case statement, as well as the content and the similarities in terms of how the case statements are structured and how the message is disseminated in a really good way. Next slide. The second thing you want to do in terms of really being effective at communicating with your membership is understanding them. You know, who are they beyond just being parents or grandparents or past parents of players that are performing in your club? So what are the things that matter, right? In fundraising, one of the things that really matters is the level of wealth and their history of giving to philanthropy in general, to other 501c3s. You wouldn't know because you haven't done it as a club, so you have no history, unless maybe you have a donate button when people are registering, and then sometimes they just sort of give. But you know, that's not scientific, it's not tactical, it's just sort of reactive. So we look at this very much in a data-driven way, almost scientifically. And there's a great tool with a company that we partner with, where we're able to take an entire membership and screen it, do a wealth screening on it. And that then provides, if their net worth is over $1 million as a household, a comprehensive look into each member family and their net worth. So when we do this, we might have thousands of records going in, and then it'll spit out whatever data, and then it may be that a particular club has 268 millionaires, with the highest net worth being 2.2 billion. That actually happened with one of our San Francisco clients. And okay, now we know. Now we understand. The data also spits out where they actually give to, what sector they give to, including sports and recreation and education, as well as any foundation affiliations, and as I mentioned, the support areas that we know they give to, as well as the level of giving. So you get an idea of what that level is. So it's very scientific and really helps in terms of triaging and understanding where the high net worth parents are within your membership in a very scientific way. And beyond that, for some clubs, we've gone and done some screening on grandparents and whatever data you have that you want screened, that's what we do for a club. And so the art of understanding is really understanding the affinity. Do they have affinity? Do they have access to capital in terms of their community involvement? Are they connected? And what's their reputation, in the community? Is it good? Is it strong? That all needs to be assessed individually once you've got that well screening done. And then it's really leveraging social relationships. Once we know where the wealth is, we'll check with the board of directors, because we'll know which parents on which teams. We'll talk to coaches and team managers and understand what their affinity is. If they're pleased with the club, or their kids playing, are things good with this family? Because we know that those tensions can be really important in terms of how the club is being perceived and parents' feelings around the value that they're getting. And so we do that again very scientifically. So once we've got, one, the case statement done, two, we've analyzed, and we've got a really strong sense of who everybody is in this particular year. And by the way, the dynamics of a club is fantastic, because every May with new tryouts, you're onboarding a whole new set of families. Now, you might be losing some families, but that's okay. But again, you're onboarding a whole new set of families, the wealth screening gets done, and boom, you've got a whole new set of potential donors that are in. And once you start this process, it becomes part of the culture of the club, and the new parents come in and they see, oh, this is already happening here, so the expectations are built in that they might need to consider making a gift. And I'll give you a story in a few slides about one such client where you'll see the letters, etc. So once you've got all the data understood, then you need to segment and prioritize that membership in terms of how you're going to communicate to them and how you're going to deal with them. Because again, it needs to be tactically sound and scientifically done. So we've got a term we call, which is a AAA prospect. They have high affinity, they have access to community leaders, to businesses, to foundations, to other high net worth parents, and they themselves, the third would be, they themselves are wealthy, which means they might themselves consider a nice gift. And there are two types of prospects. There are major gift prospects, and then there are retail prospects. And the science here is a major gift prospect is anyone who has the capacity to give over 1/1000th of the annual fundraising budget, which is why major gift prospects, the number varies from agency to agency. There are thresholds. It has to do, one, with the actual wealth within the agency's membership, and then two, what their affinity might be in terms of their willingness to actually transact. And then retail prospects are those who are below that threshold. Now, in terms of raw data, generally it's an 80-20 split, which is 20% are major gift prospects or less. And then the remainder are what we call retail prospects. And then the fourth area to really think about is, beyond their being a prospect, do they have such a high affinity and such a high commitment to the club, and they're not on the board, but could they be a steering committee, campaign steering committee, leadership committee prospect as well, which is really critical, because once you get into a campaign, you want to have as broad participation as possible, particularly beyond the board of directors. The next slide, I just talked about assembling the leadership, and what that term is. It's steering committee, right? So it's a large group of committed individuals who really want to see the project through. So let's be specific here. Orlando City, as an example, youth soccer has a Seminole complex. They want to put an indoor facility in. The board is committed. We're currently, we're almost done with the case statement. It may actually be up by now. And now we've been aggressively recruiting steering committee members. And what does that mean? Well, it means, one, having the executive director or the board chair or board of directors help us identify who these individuals would be. Who are the type A personalities who really want to see this happen, who really are connected and who really understand, the value of what's being proposed here. So once those are identified, they get invited by, again, the executive director, who then puts them in touch with us at Cogeo. We then get on a phone call with them and basically give them the game plan. And the game plan is as follows. As an individual, we want you to think about your entire network. And that includes other high net worth folks, businesses, small businesses, larger corporations, any kind of business, and then foundations, as well as government. Do you know anybody in Parks and Recreation, if in fact there's a good relationship there? That should be put in play with any capital campaign. And if they agree to do that, then they will put together a list in a Google Sheet. And then we get back together with them on the phone 10 days later, 10 business days or whatever later. And the list will have been populated. And then with them and the executive director and whomever from the board, we go through each entity, each name, each entity one by one. And the steering committee members explains exactly their relationship with the entity, how, what they think would be in play here. Would it be a sponsorship? Would it be a corporate gift? What would it be? And how to make the approach. And then we prioritize. We just had a call with one such steering committee member at Orlando City. He came back with 15 names, entities, and we ended up prioritizing it at the end of the call, and he's already put in play 4 meetings, which is exactly the process we want. So although it's called a committee, it's not a committee. It never meets as a committee. It's really singular work that's individually done, led by our team in partnership with the club and its leadership. So it's very concise and very effective. So who are these people? They're current and past board members for sure, members of the advisory board, anybody from the well screening list that has the AAA characteristics, right? A high affinity, high access, and if they're affluent, great. And other close stakeholders in the club's community, the mayor, city council, whoever else that has clout in the community who really gets the value of the club, economically particular. The Chamber of Commerce would be a good ally, particularly if you're a larger club with facilities that host tournaments, because they know that's a massive economic driver. I'm calling in from Richmond, Virginia, where the strikers and the kickers are. And some of you may have done the Jefferson Cup. Soccer tourism is the largest economic driver in Henrico County, which, by the way, also contains the airport here. So it's a massive county, very wealthy county, and soccer tourism is the #1 economic impact driver because of what the strikers have done in terms of building out these various facilities. So there's a lot of investment being made by the county into the club. Next slide. Now you've got everything in play. You're ready to communicate to your membership about what your plans are for fundraising and how you're going to deliver this. And you've got your board is committed, right? You've got your case statement that's really well put together. You've got your database screened so you understand. And in parallel, by the way, Coach Gio will have done foundation research, corporate research. So that's all being done as well in parallel. So that's ready to launch. And you've got your steering committee assembled. But that, by the way, grows over the campaign, because what will happen is you'll have a meeting with somebody that's been identified by a steering committee member, and the meeting goes extremely well. And it turns out that person is super engaged and really wants to see the project through, whatever the scope of the project might be. And they would be a very good candidate for the steering committee. So we would make that request of her, the individual, and say, hey, well, you really understand what we're trying to do. Would you be willing to open up your networks and help us in this way? And generally they consider it very seriously. So that group can grow dramatically over the course of the campaign, which is important to understand. It's not a fixed number group at all. So what does a capital campaign or a major gift campaign, annual major gift campaign look like? There's individual engagement. That's really the key thing. It's a numbers game. It's all about approaches and individual engagement. So the launch, I talked about the case statement that defines the needs. Prioritize your prospect list. Talked about well screening and any other club intelligence that you can glean just from one-on-one conversation. Agree that the executive director and or director of coaching will be the point people in terms of engagement, and then making sure that you're sustaining the entire process through what we call triangulation, which is we know we need to get to Shirley Smith because she's got 3 kids in the club. She never comes to games. They're super wealthy, as we know from the well screening, but we don't know her because she never comes to games. Coaches don't know her, right? The nanny brings the kids every time. Well, who knows Shirley, right? How do we get to Shirley through? And that's triangulation. It's leveraging someone to get to a person like Shirley Smith who could make a big difference in the campaign. I touched on data management, CRM. Again, make a note of this. Salesforce.com, which is the largest CRM company globally, has a nonprofit product which the CEO insisted upon, which is delivered free. And it's up to 12 licenses. And it's arguably the best product on the market, better than any for-pay product out there. So we leverage it to the hilt with all of our clients if they're not already on a legacy CRM system. And again, CRM is client relationship management, customer relationship management. It's a really good tool. And then making sure that you've got stewardship practices. Once the money comes in, you really want to do a great job thanking people for believing in you and the project. And so we've got all sorts of best business practices around this to really differentiate you as a club from the other 501c3s which your donor is giving to, because invariably they will be giving elsewhere. So if you have really good thank you practices, that'll really differentiate you and set you apart from other agencies to which they're transacting charitably. That's really important. Next slide. We mandate this to all of our client clubs, which is at a minimum 2 annual appeals. We're launching the fall appeal later this month and into the area of Giving Tuesday, which is a default sort of gimmick for an annual appeal. And this is mass appeal. It's retail giving, so it doesn't go to your major donors necessarily. And it's really cheap these days. It used to be really expensive with direct mail, really expensive. It's not prohibitively so. Now it's almost free because it's really just leveraging email and other technologies, social media technologies such as Facebook, etc. And so launch, we recommend 2 appeals, generally one right about this time of the year, between now and Thanksgiving or right thereafter, and then one in the early spring. That's timing. We also like to have our clients focus on a specific area, raising money for coaching development. Why? Because you can message it around, leveraging coaches, and their quotes, as well as how it's going to improve the coaching. You can do it around financial aid and economic access. All this talk of social justice and economic justice, pretty relevant today, and a lot of folks are buying into this. And so financial aid is actually relevant as well. But make sure that the appeal is focused on one area. We're going to look at an example in a second. And then a data capturing mechanism in place. So have a CRM system in place before you actually launch a mass appeal. And what we found over the years is all clubs are very good with email addresses. They've got them, and they're generally very accurate with their membership. So you're at an advantage here compared to a lot of our non-sport clients. And then sustaining it. Make sure you're consistent in terms of the frequency of doing this. You don't do it one year and then stop the next. It needs to be something that happens that people expect. Much like if you graduated from a college, you're getting appeals every year from your college, and so you've been conditioned. That's the idea here. We talked about stewardship, making sure that is really outstanding. And then triggering, you'll have really nice surprises on retail. Where somebody might give a large gift that qualifies as a major gift in your portfolio, well, that's going to trigger them up into the major gift realm, and they'll be treated with a little more attention, if not a lot more attention. Here's a really good sample. We had been working with this club, it's San Francisco Elite Academy, for 2 years. So they were already, they already had a year and a half under their belt. And this is the spring appeal. This was a late April appeal, early May appeal, if I remember correctly, and it was done 2.5 years ago. So let's read it because it's a good letter and it worked. The end of our fiscal year is July 31st, and we are on a mission to hit our Rising the Game 2018 campaign target. So they actually named the campaign, with the annual fund campaign, of $175,000. We have raised $113,405 to date. We need your help in order to achieve our objective. Then they talk about storytelling, right? They talk about where they are and how successful they are. By the way, this is a startup club that was launched in 2015. So San Francisco Elite Academy just completed very successful May tryouts and will form 23 teams for fall. This is up almost 50% from 16 teams in fall 2017. We're very proud of the quality of our players, the level of play on our teams, and the support we've received from the San Francisco community. Now, here's the catch now, this third paragraph. Their focus, again, is on economic equality. In order to attract the best players and provide the best training environment, the Elite Academy needs your financial support for financial aid, fields, and coaching. This year, our average cost per player exceeds our fees by over $600 per player. So they tell you exactly what the gap is, right? Because they've been raising money. Attaches a brochure that describes our highest priority annual program needs. And what is that brochure? It's a mini case statement that we put together for them from the bigger case statement, which is on our website. You can read it. And again, it focuses on financial aid. Please consider donating to our Raising the Game 2018 campaign, making a true difference in the lives of the kids we serve. Go to this link. They'll push, pull. They're pulling them into the link. Thank you, Joe Dugan, who's still the president of the Elite Academy. They were very successful in this. And the other thing that occurred later that year in November is we guided them through a $500,000 ask to a foundation over 5 years, and the foundation agreed. So they definitely blew through their goal the following year because of that $500,000 commitment, which really was a transforming gift. It really allowed them to divert money to other areas, which really improved their coaching. And they are now the most successful club, one of the most successful clubs in the Bay Area, definitely in San Francisco. So money has actually transformed this club. And by the way, that foundation gift was a current parent at the club whose foundation, tech family, whose foundation focused on social equality. She came to a cultivation event one evening, hosted by another parent group. We had no idea who she was. We had no idea that she and her husband had created this foundation. She then approached us, Joe, and then we sent one of our consultants with Joe to a meeting with her, and one thing led to, well, another to a $500,000 investment. So they just got the first 2 installments in 2019 January, 2020 January, and they'll get the next 3 again in January 21, 22, and 23. And then we'll go back to her and have her reconsider the same thing. Next slide, 18, we talked about stewardship practices and the importance of stewardship practice in terms of long-term sustainability and communication to your management. Arguably, this is the most important because it comes after a gift. And again, we want to differentiate from other 501c3s, nonprofits, to which that particular donor who's also giving to you has given. It's really the fundamental backbone of all fundraising best practice activities. And it varies by each room of the clubhouse, and we'll talk about it over the course of the next 7 webinars. Moves management is really important. That is the concept of having intentional moves on donors between asks, right? Because you're going to ask for a gift every year, and it'll be at a certain time of the year. Let's say we ask somebody in late October, and they say yes, the transaction occurs. Well, you cannot have nothing happen between October of 2020 and October of 2021 when you'll have the next meeting with them to make the next ask. But you've got to put a series of moves between those two. And generally what we do is we orchestrate one move at a minimum every quarter, and we help our clients do that. And by the way, Salesforce will trigger reminders that a move needs to be made because now we're 3 months from the last move. And then I just mentioned Salesforce CRM. It's literally your ally because it'll help you manage your audience. It'll help you, as I just mentioned, with these pings and reminders. It'll help you connect with the right people at the right time in their relationship with you as a donor in particular. Stewardship practice. So now, there was a longitudinal study done by a woman, a Canadian woman by the name of Penelope Burke. And she did a longitudinal study of major donors in Canada and the US over a period of 20 years. And they found that there are 7 types of major donors. 7 types. This has not changed. The first type is the communitarian. Doing good makes sense. As a community member, I want to make sure my community improves. We see a lot of that with clubs because of particularly those that are building out complexes or improving facilities. The devout, doing good is God's will. Right? That's why there's so much tithing and giving at churches has not gone down in the pandemic. It's actually gone up because people are accessing online, etc. The investor. And we see more and more of this. Doing good is good business. It's an investment into what government is not supporting. The socialite, these are wealthy people, generally multi-generational wealth. where this has been part of their family. Very similar to number 7, the Dynast, right? Doing good is fun and something that I have time to do. We see these a lot in independent day schools in particular. The Altruist is doing good feels right. People who give their entire fortune back. That's great. The Repayer, they generally may have benefited themselves from financial aid package in college, or some amazing thing that occurred to them because they weren't wealthy to start. So now they're giving back in return, and we see a lot of that as well. And then the Dynast, family tradition. This is how my family operates. Some of the best known dynasties are obviously the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, the Fords, the Dodges, et cetera, and all of whom have built massive foundations. The Gates Foundation will very much be known as just that over the years. So speaking of the investor, right? Warren Buffett, who's very well known as one of the top investors, when he thought about how he was going to manage his fortune in terms of philanthropy, he thought about good business as an investor. And he said, well, why should I build an entire infrastructure from scratch when Bill and Melinda Gates have their dad running the foundation? I trust Bill and Melinda. I'll just give them my money to manage. But again, very consistent with Warren Buffett as an individual, as an investor. He decided that this was the best way to do business, rightfully so, which essentially doubled the size of the Gates Foundation, which essentially doubled plus their impact globally, which is fantastic. And by the way, here's the even better news. Of these 7 types of donors, not one of them gets offended if you ask them for too much money, right? So if I were to go and ask somebody and say, look, we want you to consider $250,000 to help us with this build out, right? Even if they couldn't do that, they wouldn't be offended, right? They'd be flattered. They'd basically bring me down to a more reasonable number. Again, the communitarian, the devout, the investor, socialite, the altruist, the repayer, and the dynast. Some have multiple characteristics. A dynast can very much be a socialite, and a dynast can definitely very much be an investor, where they're going to analyze the return on investment on that. We just ran into that with the client in Wilmington, Delaware, where we were approaching the DuPont, one of the DuPont foundations, and we saw that they were not acting as a dynast and certainly not as a socialite. They were acting as investors, and they wanted to know exactly how the rowing club was going to get a return on investment on their investment. It's really interesting. So that's it for today. We covered a lot, and we're going to cover in more detail in the next 7 webinars. And if you enjoyed this, be sure to tell any other of your colleagues and other clubs in Georgia, because a lot of this will be repeated, although very subtly, over the next 7 webinars. Before I pass it on to Mel, I want to thank you for listening for the last 45 minutes. And we really do look forward to seeing you at all the next webinars, or any which you can make. We're going to do these on a monthly basis. And if you have any questions or comments or want to reach out, there's my personal email and cell phone. Don't hesitate. So Mel, why don't you close out the meeting? And thanks.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We will be sending out a follow-up email in the next 24 hours, and that will include a link to a web page that we've created specifically for Georgia Soccer members, that you'll be able to access the recorded webinar and the slides, any resources that we mentioned today, and it'll also give you easy access to communicate with Cogio. So if you have any questions in the following days, we can be sure to answer them. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day.